Hi, this is Travis with another video for you guys. So today I'm going to be talking about plantar fasciitis, which is a type of foot pain that tends to cause pain sort of right at the base of the bottom of your heel. And I'll be talking about some ways to fix it that I found to be somewhat effective, primarily with exercise. I'll touch on a few stretches as well. And then at the end, I'll talk about some other, less exercisey kind of ways that can also help. I'm not going to go into all the reasons why somebody can have plantar fasciitis. This is going to be sort of the Cliff Notes video. I'll sort of assume you've already had it diagnosed, you really, have figured out what you're up against. But if you do have plantar fasciitis, I'm going to try to give you the most bang for your buck exercises here. So that's pretty much it. So we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so first thing I'm going to show you just a simple soft tissue technique. This is a mobilitas mobility sphere, which is a little bit bigger diameter than a lacrosse ball. Lacrosse balls work great as well. I've used those a lot and had success with them. So I'm just using this because this is what I had handy. You can put this on the ground, and basically you want to try to work that bottom of the foot area. So the plantar fascia pretty much runs from, it inserts at the base of the heel here, and it kind of fans out to the toes. And so anywhere around there, you basically just want to work that tissue. And you can decide how much pressure you want to put. You can kind of come in here. I mean, you could even stand and put some body weight into it if you wanted to, but I don't always think you really need to be that aggressive. So sometimes I'll just go, sort of back and forth. You can do some circling. You can even do a little side to side. Your body will kind of tell you where to go. You can even just kind of put some deep pressure and hold it, try to breathe through it a little bit. And this is just a simple soft tissue technique. You could certainly use your hands and kind of work through and, kind of knead and just, pull across that area a little bit. That's fine to do that as well. Sometimes it's just easier because you don't have to work your hands as much. And so I'll just come in here for a minute or two. This can be a nice way to just kind of warm that area up. You're actually providing a little bit of a stretch across the plantar fascia as well. And this may not always be an area that needs to be stretched, especially if you're really flat-footed. So if your arches are really collapsed, a lot of times your plantar fascia is already pretty stretched. So you don't even have to go to town with this stuff. If your arch is not too collapsed though, you may need a little more soft tissue work. And sometimes that alone can make things feel a little bit better. Now, it's not always going to solve the problem because it doesn't really address how you got there in the first place. But sometimes this might be a good place to start. And so I'll just come in here and do some soft tissue for a minute or two, and then off you go. Now, after you've done some soft tissue work, or if you're one of those people that has a lot of pain first thing in the morning, and that's one of the hallmark signs a lot of times of plantar fasciitis, it's a sign of a lot of things because anytime you're immobile for a while, our tissue kind of cools down and stiffens up, and then you go to move again and all of a sudden you have pain. So if you're laying down for a long time, sitting down for a long time, all of a sudden you put weight on your foot and then there's that pain again. So if that's you and you feel like that's just really hard for you to kind of work through that, you can come in here and just sort of stretch your big toe joint here, which is actually pulling across this plantar fascia. This is one of those stretches that was shown to be pretty effective at addressing plantar fasciitis. And again, it's just providing a little bit of a stretch to that area. Now, shortness of that plantar fascia, the tightness may not always be the main problem. That area is going to be inflamed and there might be some adhesions there and things like that. So stretching can be a way to alleviate the symptoms. It doesn't always fix everything though. So sometimes just stretching by itself may not do it for you. Some people, on the other hand, though, do get some pretty good relief with this, and they may not need to go a lot farther. They're just starting to increase the mobility in that great toe joint. Because if that great toe joint is really stiff, all of a sudden you increase the mobility, you can take some pressure off that plantar fascia. So sometimes this can be a pretty good first line stretch before you get out of bed in the morning. Sometimes can work pretty well also. Now you can also do this standing, which I'll show in a few minutes, a way to do this a little more dynamically that I think could be a little more useful, especially with a more athletic population. But this is kind of your lower level version. So again, grab the big toe, just kind of pull it up towards your ankle, hold that for 30 seconds to a minute, and then off you go. You can do a round or two of that if you wanted to, and you could even do that intermittently during the day. There's really no perfect time to do it, but again, first thing in the morning can be a nice time if you're having a lot of that pain when you first put your foot on the ground. So here's an old tried and true exercise that's been around in PT clinics for a long time. All you're going to do is put a pillowcase or a towel or something on the ground, and this tends to work well with more flat-footed population, people who have more of a collapsed arch. Now, you have these little muscles in here kind of deep to that fascia, which we call your intrinsic foot muscles. Sometimes those can get really weak and they get overstretched, and so that can cause some problems for some people as well. And so if you can just start to restore that arch height a little bit by trying to squeeze that towel, it's almost like with your foot, you're trying to just kind of pick that towel up, something kind of like this with your foot. And it's okay if that towel doesn't actually lift, as long as you're just kind of doing that grasping motion with your foot. And this can be a way to just start to get some intrinsic foot muscle strength. I'll show some standing ways to do this later. This is kind of an easy place to start. And this is just a nice way. I tell people, just do this when you're watching television for like a minute or two, and commercial comes on and you can just do this. This is a simple one, just trying to pick up the arch of the foot, kind of squeeze the toes to try to get some muscle strength in that area. Because the other stretches aren't really going to get you any strength in those foot muscles. This is really your first line as far as strengthening, just a gentle way to get a little bit of movement happening in those muscle groups kind of in the foot and toe area. And so this is just the one I call towel squeezing. Okay, so if you've been doing that stuff I just showed and it's not really done the trick for you, or maybe you're a little more athletic and you're noticing the pain a little more when you're doing some high level things, you may need a little more of an aggressive stretch, or you may need a little bit more aggressive strengthening. And so a simple one is what I call the runner stretch. And so this is the tried and true simple way to stretch your calf, nothing fancy. People can certainly stretch their calf area, in other ways, but this is just nice because you're using your whole body weight to really get into, a lot of that connective tissue down in the calf area, and you can just kind of hold that position, breathe through it for a good 60, seconds or so, somewhere in that neck of the woods. Now, if you want to get a little more of that great toe stretch, so earlier when I was showing that great toe stretch where you sort of pull it this way, you can also do that in this position. So you would go to that same position, but now just sort of put your knee forward to stretch that great toe joint a little bit. And same thing, you can just hold this for about the same count, 60 seconds or so, and you can do a couple rounds of that if you'd like. Really, you're also trying to achieve some symmetry. So you don't want to create laxity, so sometimes more stretching isn't always better. So if you have a lot of mobility in that great toe joint, I wouldn't go to stretching. I would do more exercise, and that usually would be my first line for that. But if you figured out that, I can't really lift my big toe that high, or if my big toe compared to my, one side's maybe going up just a little bit, and then this other big toe is going up a lot. We tend to call that hallux limitus sometimes, when your big toe is not able to extend that far, and that will put more demand on your plantar fascia sometimes. So again, you can do this stretch statically. So this is your runner stretch again, the first one. This is kind of modified for the great toe. And then I could even come in here and do it kind of dynamically, where I do a little bit of a rocking motion, okay? And so I just kind of come forward. You can even bring your hips forward a little bit too to put some weight into it. And just go forward and back to stretch that great toe joint. And I can definitely feel that stretch, right in that area. If you have some tension in that plantar fascia though, you may very well feel that, or you feel that familiar pain. As long as it's just moderate and not really intensifying a lot, it should be okay. If you notice that pain lingers a lot though after you're done, or it's worse than it was when you started, I'd say maybe don't force it then. It might be that stretch could be a little too aggressive for you, and you won't want to back off and do that seated version that I showed earlier. But that's the one I call the runner stretch, modified for great toe extension, or even what I call rocking, where I'm just kind of doing this dynamically. And if you're going to do it dynamically, you can do it also for about a minute or so. Or if you want to count, maybe 20, 25 times somewhere in that neck of the woods, should be a pretty good count for you. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about today is hip strengthening. Now, if you have weak hip abducting muscles, which are the muscles that kind of lift your leg out to the side, these muscles tend to primarily be your glute medius, glute minimus. They're sort of deep to that big glute muscle on the outside, and they help to stabilize our pelvis. And so maybe it's going to let you walk in a way where your arches are kind of collapsing a little bit more. And so it isn't necessarily that your foot muscles are particularly weak. They just have too much of a demand because your hips aren't really doing their job well. And so a nice pelvic stabilization exercise that can kind of get your hips doing their thing a little bit more effectively is the famous tried and true exercise we call the monster walk. So usually I'll just take one of these mini bands, and I'll put the link to this at the bottom. So I think I mentioned not a lot of equipment today. These mini bands though do work pretty well, so I will throw the link at the bottom. So sorry I didn't mind me put that at the beginning of the video. They're pretty simple. I use the ones by Perform Better, but there's a lot of companies that make them. Just throw this guy around your ankles. You could come up and put it above the top of the knee as well though. And then from there what I would do, so I'm going to show it in place, but you could go a distance in each direction if you wanted to. You're going to just try to keep your pelvis level and then step to the side and then come back again. Make sure you're not letting your arch really collapse too much either. You want to kind of lift your arch as your foot's touching down. And so you can go side to side. You can even go back a little bit to kind of make it a little more dynamic. Now when you go forward, that gets a little more hip flexor. So if you're gonna go back, that gets a little more into glute max, but you're still gonna get those hip abductors. So you can kind of decide how far you wanna go. Obviously, the farther you step out, the more that muscle is gonna work, and actually it's gonna work on both sides, because that muscle is helping my leg to lift out, but then I'm also stabilizing my pelvis with the leg that I'm standing on. And so people tend to sometimes teeter-totter on this one, or their hips are moving a lot. So just keep that hip nice and level. I tell people kind of like you're hanging a picture frame as you go back and forth. And if you can do that, keeping your arches a little bit elevated, it's a nice foot and ankle sort of stabilizing exercise. Also works the hips. So that can be another place to go if some of the earlier stuff maybe hasn't quite done the trick for you and you're still having some pain in that heel portion, kind of right here where the plantar fascia tends to originate from. Okay, so that's pretty much it for today. So plantar fasciitis can be a pretty big topic. So this was the short and sweet, kind of the Cliff Notes version. These exercises and these movements, though, I have found to be pretty effective. You know, again, though, it's not a one-size-fits-all. There sometimes can be different reasons why somebody has plantar fasciitis, and sometimes it can be as simple as just activity modification alone. If someone's doing a lot of repetitive standing and they have crappy shoe wear, they don't have good arch support, sometimes just, you know, modifying that, just getting them some better shoes, getting them some better arch support. You know, you can decide if you need a custom orthotic or not, maybe with, you know, a doctor of physical therapy or a podiatrist or something like that. But you know, you may not always even need a custom orthotic, because I know those can get expensive, but sometimes orthotics can help. And then, you know, obviously depending on how much time you're spending on your feet. So if you can modify those things, and you know, again, particularly on hard surfaces, so if you can modify that, sometimes you may not even need a lot of exercise. Sometimes you might just need to change the environment that you're in. And because sometimes even the best exercises, the best stretches, aren't going to undo, you know, a lot of bad habits or a lot of just repetitive mechanical stress on that plantar fascia. So that can be something that can help. Also, night splints can have shown to be pretty effective as well. Over the course of the night, you know, most people's feet tend to rest in this position, and so this area, the thinking is it kind of shortens, and so then you go to put that weight down and all of a sudden you get your pain. So by having your foot in more of that prolonged stretch, it doesn't have an opportunity to sort of get short, and then you don't get as much of that pain when you put your foot down on the ground first. So night splints can be helpful. I've had some success with those, but again, it really depends on why you're having the plantar fasciitis in the first place. So as always, I always say when in doubt, get checked out. This video is really just assuming that you already sort of know what you're up against, you know, had it diagnosed, or you know, you've really obviously done your homework and figured that out. Definitely subscribe if you like this stuff. I haven't been uploading videos quite as often because I feel like I've already got a pretty good amount of content up now, but I will continue to keep content coming, probably at this point in time, maybe on a once a month basis, but definitely want to hear what you guys have to say. So let me know what you think, comment below, and as always, I hope you have some fun.